So, what does it really take for one single citizen to go up against an entire judicial system? Today, we're going to break down a legal document that does exactly that. It accuses a whole judicial district of systemic, coordinated corruption. And let me tell you, this isn't just any old legal filing. It's a fascinating and meticulously built legal strategy.
Okay, so here's our roadmap. We're going to walk through the 5 key pillars of this legal attack. First, we'll look at the core conflict. Then, we'll dive into a pretty shocking allegation of what the document calls gun laundering. After that, we'll see how claims of lost and hidden evidence start to pile up, which then leads to a direct challenge to the fairness of the courtroom itself. And finally, we'll see how all of these pieces get woven together to build a massive conspiracy case.
All right, so let's get right to it. What's the fundamental claim at the heart of this entire legal battle?
The whole case really boils down to this idea of a two-tiered system of justice. The filing alleges that there's one group of people, the favored, who are basically protected because laws just aren't enforced against them. But for the other group, the disfavored, the law is used like a weapon through what it calls hyper-enforcement. And this is where it gets really serious. The argument here is that these aren't just random mistakes or a few bad apples. No, the allegation is that there's a coordinated apparatus of officials. We're talking everyone from law enforcement to the courts, who are all operating together as a single corrupt enterprise.
So let's dig into the first major pillar of their case. And it's a big one. It's this really explosive claim about how firearms were handled.
Now, to really get this part of the case, you have to understand a key legal concept called state-created danger. So look, in simple terms, the government isn't normally responsible for failing to protect you from some random harm. But that all changes if the government's own actions are the very thing that puts you in danger in the first place.
And the lawsuit uses this incredible analogy to make the point impossible to miss. It argues that police taking a gun away from someone who's not supposed to have one, only to then turn around and give it to that person's friend or proxy, well, that's just like taking the car keys from a drunk driver and then handing them to their drunk buddy in the passenger seat. In both scenarios, the state is actively creating a dangerous situation. Now, this isn't just some clever line they came up with. It's a real legal strategy, and it's built on a foundation of actual court precedents. The complaint relies on established cases, like Reed v. Gardner, to frame this alleged gun laundering as a clear violation of constitutional rights. And here's the kicker. The filing claims this wasn't just a one-time screw-up. It points to something called a firearms gap dossier, to allege a pattern that's been going on for 16 years. A pattern of what it calls deliberate indifference, which is just legal speak for knowing there's a huge risk and just not caring. It was a policy choice, and the document argues it's had lethal consequences. Okay, moving on to this second pillar of the case. This is where we get into allegations that crucial evidence wasn't just lost, it was intentionally buried.
This part of the case uses another very specific legal theory, a backward-looking denial of access. It's a really interesting legal angle. It basically means you're suing for 2 things. First, for the bad thing that happened to you, and second, for the fact that officials allegedly covered it up, which robbed you of your chance to get justice for that first thing.
So the case points to this one specific incident they call the Newman spoliation. The plaintiff alleges that a police officer took a pistol into evidence, but then intentionally never wrote a police report about it. That basically made the gun and the evidence vanish from the official record.
And here's why that matters so much. The district attorney actually had to drop felony charges. Why? Because you can't prove a case without evidence, and that missing report was the evidence. That right there is the lost remedy they're talking about. The chance for justice was gone.
Okay, so we've talked about guns and evidence. Now the lawsuit takes aim at the courtroom itself, the very integrity of the judicial process.
The key idea here is something called structural bias. And this is a huge accusation. We're not just talking about disagreeing with a judge's decision. We're talking about an argument that the whole setup is rigged from the start, that a conflict of interest is so deep, so baked into the system, that the chance of getting a fair shake is just unconstitutionally low. So, what's the actual claim here? The document points to something it calls the Nussberger conflict. It alleges that a court commissioner was basically wearing 2 different hats. On one hand, they were acting as a private defense lawyer for the plaintiff's opponent, but at the exact same time, they were sitting on the bench with judicial power over key witnesses in that very same case. That's a massive conflict of interest.
Then the filing lays out this whole timeline of events that it frames as an illegal child seizure, built on what it calls a foundation of lies.
It allegedly started with a falsified address just to get the case into a certain court. Then a custody order was gotten based on a completely fabricated story. This led to the child being seized, followed by what the document calls a sham investigation that just ignored any evidence that contradicted the original story.
All right, this is where it all comes together. We've seen all these separate pieces. Now let's look at how the lawsuit weaves them into one massive conspiracy claim.
So here's how they build the conspiracy case, step by step. First, the alleged gun laundering created the physical danger. Second, the destruction of evidence covered up those initial crimes. And third, the structural bias in the court made sure that the system wouldn't and couldn't correct itself. And what's the end result? A coordinated conspiracy, they allege, to violate the plaintiff's constitutional rights.
Okay, so you've heard all this incredibly complex legal strategy, and you're probably wondering, who put this all together? Well, the answer is maybe the most surprising part of this whole story. How did a single person, acting on their own, without a lawyer, and who identifies as disabled, build such an incredibly detailed case?
The answer, believe it or not, is technology. But the filing is really careful to make a specific point here. It states, and I'm quoting, "The AI did not write this case. The plaintiff did. The AI functioned strictly as a scribe and a research assistant. It was a tool under constant human direction."
And they actually lay out the whole workflow to show how this worked. It wasn't just press a button to get a lawsuit. The plaintiff provided all the facts and documents. They corrected the AI's drafts over and over again. They even used an auditory audit, listening to audio summaries to catch errors their disability might cause them to miss while reading before finally dictating the arguments themselves.
And this all leads to a really powerful argument. The filing claims the AI wasn't a cheat code. It was an accessibility bridge. It argues that this technology is a reasonable accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act, one that allows disabled litigants to actually have a fighting chance at a level playing field.
And that really leaves us with a huge question, doesn't it? As technology like this becomes more common, as it lowers the barrier for a regular person to build a complex legal case, are we about to see a fundamental change in the balance of power between an individual and the state?